everybody, Ty here. Hope everyone is doing well. After what's been a nice break here, we're starting to see some signs for some severe potential, and also, if you saw the thumbnail, winter's not done just yet. So we're gonna get into the details of that. Hoping everyone is doing well. Make sure you guys are hitting that like button, by the way, and also hit that subscribe button if you are new around here. Definitely appreciate the support over the last couple months. Let's try to keep that going if we can here. But as you can see, we're not wasting too much in the way of time here. At least over the next 3 days, not a whole lot to talk about in the way of winter weather signals until we get into the weekend here. You can see that up towards the UP and Michigan and over towards the interior Northeast, we're starting to see a little bit in the way of action here. Most of it's going to stay north of the border for the most part. And then as we go through days 4 to 7 here, you see that we'll continue to see that trend continue, and then eventually we do start to see some action over here towards the Rocky Mountain ranges here, especially towards the central part of that region. As we go further along here, the biggest talking point we're going to have today is actually regarding severe weather. Now, obviously, as we know, once we start getting into March and April and into the spring season, it's usually peak time for severe weather. Towards the deep south in particular is usually our point of interest. And as we get towards days 6, 7, and 8 here, notice that the predictability to load tags are becoming a bit more common. That's because of what we've been seeing on our weather models as of late here. Now, I didn't talk about it yesterday because I didn't want to give you the same old rinse and repeat that we always give here on the channel. So I gave you a little break. But one thing I want to make note of here, we mentioned this in the last video a couple days ago as well. So you get towards the 27th and the 28th, not a whole lot going on. There is going to be some troughing out towards the east, which is going to drop the temperatures. But it's really once we start getting into the 3rd and beyond where things start to get interesting. You can see that we have this pretty stout looking trough here. Even looks like it tries to go negatively tilted before all is said and done here. And we're also going to have the GFS here on the bottom left corner for a change here, because I really want you to pay attention closely to what the euro is showing on this one. Either one of these have the potential to produce severe weather, but watch what happens once this trough fizzles out and fades away here. Looks like a classic case of a trough ejection. New trough is coming in here at this point, looking neutral, may even go negative tilt, but also there's a couple key characteristics that I'm looking for here that lead me to have increased concern about the severe weather risk as we go into the 4th and beyond here. You can see that for one, if we go ahead and pull this up on the screen here, I often look for this little feature right here in these troughs. It's called the ski jump. It's where you see the front edge of this trough here, or the forward flank, kind of pushing up like this. Usually when we get that, we're able to get much more moisture out ahead of the storm system here. We also get good instability, and usually a strong frontal boundary is accompanying this as well. Now, obviously, we're 180 hours out, so we're more than a week away. So, obviously, no guarantees, but this is a signal that has definitely piqued my interest for sure. And then as we continue to go forward here, like I said, you see a similar signal on GFS, just not quite as prominent as what the euro is showing. This also has the potential to be a multi-day event to go along with it. So we're going to be, of course, watching this warm sector for severe weather, but also you have to be watchful of the backside of this, because it does look like we have enough cold air able to roll in around the backside of this, and any remnant moisture is going to mix with that, and we're going to get some snow here. At times it could be heavy. I don't expect a lot in regards to snowfall totals with this system. It also looks like it's a quick mover as well. But in any case, though, we might have yet another dynamic system on our hands as we go forward. And then from that point, we do see more troughing ahead, which does lead me to also be concerned about flash flooding off towards the deep south here. And up towards the far northern reaches of the U.S. is where we still might have potential for winter weather. But as we go further along here, we see a pretty big cold snap beginning to take shape here across the deep south here as we get towards the 9th. So while this is not set in stone, the GFS is showing a much different outcome. This is definitely going to be a date to pay close attention to. Then after that, we go from one extreme to the other here, because you see this ridge coming in. This is going to be warm air building, And this is also going to lead to a slightly quieter weather pattern for the time being until this guy starts to come in here towards the end. This is a pretty stout looking trough, a lot like the last one. Obviously, we're in no man's land because we're past that 300-hour mark here for sure. So we don't even really have a concrete signal on this. But notice towards the very end of the GFS run, we're seeing a very similar look here. So we may be in the early stages of starting to see a signal here as we get towards the 12th and the 13th here. So active pattern looks like it's going to be ahead here for the US here. We are going to have a break in the meantime though, so I do urge you to enjoy that while we can. Now, one thing to make note of here, we're going to be going euro the rest of the way here for a change, is we're going to also be taking a look at the temperatures because it's going to be pretty dramatic what we see here as a result. When you get extreme ridges and troughs like that, you'll usually get extreme warming and extreme cooling. Out ahead of the first trough, which is going to be towards the very beginning of next month here, you can see that we're already getting some pretty impressive warming off towards the deep south. So our warm sector is already coming into place, is already being set into place here, well ahead of the storm system. So we have that first trough move in. Doesn't really do a whole lot to really hamper this region here. But as we go further along here, this is when we start getting into that time frame for the second trough to roll in here. Look at the warm sector that occurs across Texas first off here. We're starting to see 80-degree temperatures to start out March. Not necessarily unheard of, but not common either. And considering the fact that we have that storm system coming in, that could lead to an increased threat of severe weather over here as well. As we go further along, this, I think the 4th into the 5th, maybe even the 6th, somewhere between that time frame is when we'll start to see the more stout severe threat as of right now. You see a strong frontal boundary come in here. You can see this little gradient that's popped up here. Out ahead of the front, you can see where we have the 60, some 70-degree temperatures. I think the most favorable area as of right now is going to end up staying to the south if this does indeed verify. Now, if we go further along here, you can see that front move through and then the cold air follows in behind that. And this is where the potential for even winter weather may come into play for the deep south here briefly. Doesn't last long because before we know it, we're back into the 40s and 50s. We start having yet another warm sector begin to build. And again, this is where we have that storm system, that troughing that comes in at the very end of this run here. GFS, like I said, GFS and Euro are a little bit different, but not too dissimilar to where I would go as far as to say that it's a signal, but it's not something that we can just downplay at this juncture. So another key factor, and we're going to kind of hone in a little bit on the severe weather for the time being, is of course moisture. You need an abundant amount of moisture. Usually nice little moist sector will often coincide along with the warm sector that we were just looking at here. And as you can see, that moisture is clearly building as we get towards the very end of the month here. Like I said, not really much of a severe setup as we get into the end of February, but once we get into March here, as we get into the 3rd and into the 4th, look at how we get this moisture nose that pops up here. It coincides perfectly with that warm sector that we were just looking at. 60-degree dew points are abundant here across southeastern parts of Texas into east central Texas as well. And then as we go into the 4th here, that moist sector only builds further, and it even hangs around to the 5th, so it could be potentially multiple days with severe weather potential depending on how that trough behaves over the next few days. We'll start to get a little bit of a better idea of what the trough's behavior, its tilt tactics, etc. is going to be once we get into the 3 to 4 day range here, because this could still trend the other way and actually end up weakening as well. So a lot to keep track of here. But anywhere across the deep south, whether you're over towards East Texas, over towards the Mississippi Delta, even the Mississippi River Basin in general, which would even include some parts of the Midwest, might want to be watchful of severe weather, not just for the very beginning of the month, but potentially also towards the middle of the month. Because like I said, that other trough comes in towards mid-month. That's looking pretty impressive here. And while, of course, we're in no man's land by a mile or so, pretty much at this point, or I would even go as far as say a country mile, you can see that 360 hours out, we're already seeing some signs that everything's trying to come together. Like I said, going 2 weeks out with a forecast, going with the forecast 2 weeks out is kind of foolhardy. So I'm not gonna speculate as to whether or not this ends up happening. I'm not gonna hype this up, but Definitely something that you're going to hear me talk about more over the course of the next week or so to see if this does indeed verify. Now, one thing that we're also going to look at here, we're going to look at a couple other features, of course, before we get into winter weather. We'll be looking at the lightning flash density, and this is mainly going to cover where we have the highest likelihood of lightning. And of course, over the course of the 3rd and onward here, look at the focus that we have here. While I can't really zoom in and give you a full picture of the lower 48 here, this area in the purple usually highlights where we could see at least 3 flashes per day or more, which is typically a lot based off of this model run here. I do think there's going to be some pockets where we could see at least 7 based off of this metric or more, which is very high. So usually when we see this lightning flash density really start to light up like this, somewhere in there has a heightened chance of getting some degree of severe weather. How significant? This is not really the model to answer that, of course. This is why we look at the other parameters. But as you can see, very clear signal of activity across the deep south here as we get from the 3rd through the 6th here. Then eventually, of course, as I mentioned before, we slow down. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at a couple of early parameters here. Mainly going to be looking at the CAPE here, the convective available potential energy. Now, one thing that I always say that I don't like to do is overhype in general. And then also another thing I don't really like doing is using the global models in regards to instability like this, because it's not always reliable. But when you get signals like these, where we're getting into 1500, 1600 joules per kilogram in CAPE, that is kind of hard to ignore at this point. Like I said, I'm not thinking that this is going to be the big one. I'm not even going to allow you guys to say that, oh, Ty's thinking that we're screwed. No, it's not that at all. But I want to make it clear, though, that there is a pretty clear signal that something could happen here between the 3rd and the 6th. Just exactly what, it's still pretty unclear at this point. So, like I said, we're going to start making videos just about every day to keep an eye on this from this point here. So stay tuned for that and make sure you get that notification bell on as well. But in any case, now that we've talked about our severe weather potential, let's go ahead and take a look at where we could see snowfall here. Now, a lot of these areas that we'll be looking for snowfall at, it's not going to be uncommon to see it, even during March at this point. However, there is one point in time here, and we're going to have the GFS back here on the bottom left corner of the screen again. And what I want you to pay attention to in particular is that time frame between the 8th and the 12th here. So here is where that cold air starts to seep in, and then we get that warm sector beginning to recover as we head into the 3rd and to the 4th. Now, while that's happening, we're starting to see a little bit more activity out towards the Rockies, especially the eastern Rockies. Eventually, this will slip in right behind this system here, and we start to see some wraparound snow on the backside of this. So a lot of these areas where you're seeing snow now, you're going to most likely start out as rain. But like I said, depending on how much moisture we end up getting with this deformation zone, you could end up getting slightly greater snowfall totals here. Just how significant, I'm not going to really hype that up just yet. Obviously, like I said, we're more than a week out, so it's kind of hard to have a lot of confidence in it. But another thing that, harping back to the severe weather here, another reason why I'm particularly interested in this event is because of this look that we have right here at the 180-hour mark. This is heading into the evening of the 4th, where I'm seeing these line segments kind of pop up here. Now, these line segments could mean a multitude of things in regards to our severe weather hazards, but in particular, based off the way that trough is looking, I do think there's going to be an abundant amount of wind shear available, and I do think that this will slightly amplify that threat of tornadoes. Like I said, again, no guarantees with this. We're going to see multiple model updates before this event even comes within range of the convective models, so no real reason to panic or hype this up any, even though I'm sure some people will. But you're not going to find that here in any case. But this look here does indeed pique my interest. You aren't really going to see this on the GFS, however, which is another reason why I have a few doubts with this as well. So, of course, like I said before, we're going to still be making updates videos on just this setup alone regularly all the way up until the event itself, or unless it downtrends. And of course, as I mentioned before, we get that wraparound snow on the backside for the Midwest here. This eventually, of course, moves north of the border. We do have some remnant snow and lake-enhanced snow expected here across the Great Lakes region and over into the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. Totals, however, will not be significant. Then, this guy appears right here. We get this guy right here. It comes in. We do have light snow expected based off of what we're seeing here in the 10-day range for both the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma, especially central Oklahoma. Eventually, this does try to sneak its way off to the south. And then look at this right here. We've seen this before. We've seen this little feature pop up in the Gulf here, and then it causes all kinds of havoc over towards the deep south. Now, there are a couple of things that come into play for this. For one, you got to look at this 540 line here. This 540 line, as you can see, especially on the Euro, because GFS isn't really showing a prominent signal of this, so we're not going to pay as much attention to that. But as you can see with the Euro here, you can see that this 540 line is staying just a little bit further off towards the north here. So this will mainly be snow that will be reserved off towards the mountain ranges here. This high pressure could, however, change things. It could enhance this just ever so slightly with a little bit of mid-level dryness. But it's uncertain at this point, so I'm not going to really harp too much on this. But if we get towards the backside of that, we get some mountains. We get that mountain snow continuing to come in here. And we do get a couple periods where we could even see some of the major cities like Atlanta and Birmingham. Also, maybe even Huntsville, I think. I'm not quite as familiar with Alabama here, excuse me. I think this is Huntsville here. Possibly getting some flurries here as we get into the weekend of the 8th and the 9th here. So, like I said, a lot of questions in regards to that setup as well. I'm still not expecting anything major out of that as of yet. But then, of course, as we go further along, we have our next storm system coming in. Nothing really to show for it just yet, because we're obviously at the very edge of this model's range here. GFS, of course, showing a similar look at the very end of that. So, a lot of interesting stuff ahead here. Not necessarily bad news, but some things that we will be keeping an eye on, of course, over the next couple of weeks here. But that being said, you made it to the end. Definitely appreciate you. Definitely leave a comment with where you are and what your thoughts are on this potential weather setups, on the potential weather setups ahead here. With that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your Monday, and I will see you tomorrow. Till then, take care and have a good night.